Afreich Chanukah, nice to see faces, nice to see names, if not faces. Of course, we are in the midst of the incredible Yom Tov of Chanukah, the Yom Tov of miracles. I thought we might take a look at the primary text about Chanukah this morning that we're all familiar with since we're, yay big. And actually, if we take a close look at this text, we're going to see that there are many, many questions and challenges to be found as we dissect this text together. Of course, the primary text, the primary source for the entire story of Chanukah is a Talmudic footnote. Chanukah does not merit its own Masechta, does not merit its own tractate in the Mishnah, and that's a discussion for a whole nother time because of the reason, although we might touch on maybe a hint to that reason in our discussion this morning. But the entire reference to Chanukah that we have, what we call the Sugyot of Chanukah, the relevant discussions of Chanukah, all appear in the second chapter of the tractate of Masechet Shabbat, where we discuss the appropriate materials that may be used to light our Shabbat candles. And then we get into a side discussion, a long tangent that carries out through three full folios of Talmud, discussing Chanukah. Do the same laws apply to the materials that are allowed to be used to light the Chanukah candles? And then we get into the discussion. Our sages, in the midst of that discussion, realize, well, we're talking about Chanukah candles, but we haven't even talked about what Chanukah is. And that's where we're going to pick up right now. My Chanukah. Our sages ask, what is Chanukah? The TORAH Rabbanan, as our rabbis taught, B'kafeh b'Kislev Yomei de Chanukah, they're beginning with the 25th day of Kislev, begins the days of Chanukah. And it was established that these are days that we do not offer a eulogy and we do not fast. So what does that tell us about these days? These are days of simcha, of joy. Okay? And why? Because when the Greeks came into the temple, Timu kol hashmanin shebeichal, they rendered impure all the oil that was in the temple. And when the sons of the high priest, the Chashmonians, rose up against the mighty Greek Empire, and they were victorious, they searched high and low, and they could only find one little jar of oil that had the insignia of the Kohen Gadol. Okay, okay, there was only enough oil in this little jar to last one day, and a miracle occurred, and that little jar of oil lasted for 8 days. That's the story that the Talmud tells us. That's the story that we're all familiar with, and since we're toddlers, the basic story of Chanukah. But I just want to go through this story again slowly, and we'll notice there are many questions to be asked. First of all, the Chashmonaim. The Chashmonaim were the high priests. So you think about this whole imagery, okay? You think about the whole imagery of the victory, of this victory against the Greeks. The Chashmonaim, the religious leaders, okay? The yeshiva bachrim, if you will, they lead an uprising against the mighty Greek Empire, the greatest superpower in the world at that time, and they're victorious. Anytime I think about this story, I think about the book The Chosen, okay, by Chaim Potok, or the movie, better yet, even the movie The Chosen by Chaim Potok. Everyone here has probably heard of the book. If you haven't read the book, you've probably seen the movie. And the opening scene in the movie is you see these more modern-looking Jewish kids from Brooklyn dressed in their blue jeans and their Converse All-Star sneakers, and they're getting ready to go play a baseball game, and they're throwing the ball around the diamond. And who are their opponents that show up? The opponents that show up are these Chassidish boys from Williamsburg, and the Chassidish boys are dressed in their long black coats, and they're not wearing sneakers; they're wearing regular dress shoes. And the opening scene is that these Chassidish boys play the more modern-looking kids, and they beat the pants off them. They're completely victorious. And I always think of that imagery when I think of the Chashmonaim. The Chashmonaim are taking on the most sophisticated superpower of the world at the time. They're taking on the mighty Greek Empire. And who are they? They're the religious leaders. They're these yeshiva bachrim, and they are victorious. And yet, that doesn't seem to be what's emphasized here in our Gemara. What's emphasized is what? That they search high and low for this little jar of oil. Now, let me ask you a question. By the way, that jar of oil, the Talmud tells us, has the insignia of the high priest. So who are the Chashmonaim? The Chashmonaim are the sons, are the family of the high priest. So if there was oil to be found that had the insignia of the high priest, wouldn't it be obvious to them where it was hidden? They would have to search high and low. What does it mean that they had to search high and low to find the oil that had the insignia of their father, the high priest? Doesn't make any sense. They should have known where it was if they indeed are the family of the high priest. And I'll take it a step further. Nowhere in the annals of halacha is there any depiction, at least I've been through Hilchos Beis HaMechira, the Rambam, which deals with the halachos associated with the Beis HaMikdash. I've been through it a few times. I don't recall ever seeing anything that says that the shema that was used on the mizbeach or in the menorah was sealed in jars with a little OU insignia from the high priest. It doesn't. Nowhere in the annals of halacha is that written except for here. So what does it mean that they search high and low to only find one little jar of oil that had the little OU, the little badaks insignia of the high priest? And I'm going to ask another question, just practical halacha. There's a precept in halacha of what's called tuma hutra b'tzibur. Okay, that in the environment of tuma, that if the tzibur needs something in the environment of tuma, any oil could have been used to kindle that light, because we want to restore whatever semblance of kedusha we can back to the Beis HaMikdash. And I'll take it a step further. If we know the laws of Tumah Tahara, we know that the minute that seal would have been broken, right? Here's a bottle. The minute you open up that seal in an environment that's tameh, what happens to all the shemen that would be in that bottle? It would become rendered impure as well. So what is the significance of this story? What really happened? What is the miracle of the shemen all about? Okay, we're going to come back to that question in a moment. I actually want to suggest that there's actually an alternative version of the story that appears in another rabbinic text, early rabbinic text, and that's the version of the story that appears in the Pesikta. You take a look, this is this text here. Let's learn the Pesikta together. The Lama Madlik Nerot B'Chanukah. Okay, and the Pesikta asks, why do we light candles on Chanukah? Ela b'shash nitzku banu shel Chashmonai Kohen Gadol. Okay, it recalls the time when the Chashmonayim, the sons of the Kohen Gadol, okay, were victorious. Okay, when they rebelled against the Malchut Yavan, when they were victorious, they overcame the Greek Empire. Shenamar, Morata vanecha Tzion banecha Yavan. Okay, that you have the conquering of the sons of Zion over the sons of Yavan, of Greece. Nichnesu leveit hamikdash. What happened? They went into the Beis HaMikdash, and what did they find there? They didn't nothing here in the Pesikta about searching for one little jar of oil and finding that miracle oil. Rather, what they search for and what they find, Matzu Sham, doesn't even say search. What they find there, Matzu Sham Shmona Shipudim Shel Barzel. They found 8 iron spears. The Kavo Otam, and they bound them together. Velitu B'tocham Nerot. And they lit within them candles. Okay. So in the version of the story that appears in the Pesikta, the version we just learned together, something incredible. There's no mention of the miracle oil. Rather, and that an oil that should have lasted for 1 day lasted 8 days, and that's why we light our candles for 8 days. But rather, what happened? They came into the Beis HaMikdash, which had been defiled. And they find there the weapons of destruction, the spoils of war, okay? Weapons that were used for destructive purposes, for harmful purposes, and they transform those those iron shiburim, those iron spears, okay, forks, spears, okay, that were used for destructive purposes, and they transform them into a makeshift menorah. And this because they found 8 spears instead of 7, they don't make a makeshift menorah that resembles the 7 candelabra that was in the base of Mikdash originally. They make an 8-candled candelabra using those 8 iron spears. And because of that, to recall that makeshift menorah, when they rededicated the base of Mikdash, where they took the spoils of war, where they transformed weapons used for destructive purposes into something sacred, into something holy, because there were 8 of them. Well, that's why we light 8 candles ad hayom, on Chanukah. Now, it's very interesting, very fascinating. If we think about what we're experiencing this Chanukah, we're in the midst of a war. We're in the midst of a war of darkness against evil once again, of shedding light to overcome an incredible darkness that exists all around us. And Bezrat Hashem, when we traverse this war, okay, the challenge for all of us and the message of Chanukah, particularly this Chanukah, is when this war is, please God, behind us soon, what are we going to do with this experience? What are we going to do to transform the spoils of war into something sacred that fills the world with light? We're going to come back to that idea in a moment. Rav Kook Zatzal, in a beautiful teaching, he reverts back to the more familiar story, the story in the Gemara that we learned, that we asked so many questions about, the story of the miracle oil, that cruiser oil. And Rav Kook says the following beautiful words. Listen to his words. B'chol adam Yisrael yesh tzad kahuna. Within every single Jew, there is a little bit of Kohenic identity, okay? Every single one of us has a little bit of aspect of being a priest, of being a Kohen within us, okay? Because collectively, the Jewish people, Rav Kook says, because collectively, the Jewish people are called a nation of priests and a holy people. Now listen to his words. The inner holiness, okay? The inner desire for the holiness of life and the wisdom of Torah, ganuzahi ba'omek halev ha'yisraeli. That is hidden, tucked away safely within the heart of every single Jew. Within the heart of every single one of us is something that we refer to as what? The Pintalayid, says Rav Kook. He says, now listen to his words. That's the jar of oil, the small jar of oil. Ha'olam ha'pnimi aganuz, the inner hidden realm of the Jew, of the neshama, the pintalayid that's hidden deep within every single one of us. It's innate within all of our hearts. Shemunach b'chotmo shel Kohen Gadol, that's sealed with the insignia of the ultimate Kohen Gadol, meaning who? Hashem Yisbarach. Okay, that is neshama. That's the hidden jar of oil. Lo yachlu hayevanim l'tameh. Rav Kook says the message of our Agadata is an Agadata. Okay, and those of us that have learned Agadata together before in the past will remember that these rabbinic legends need not be taken solely as historical fact, as absolutes, but rather they're encrypted within the Gemara, the annals, the canon of the Talmud, in order to teach us moral, eternal, relevant lessons. And Rav Kook says that this story of the Chashmonaim searching high and low for a little jar of oil that's sealed with the insignia of the Kohen Gadol is such an example of an Agadata that need not be taken literally, but rather, says Rav Kook, is meant to teach us that within every single one of our hearts, there's a Pintalayid, there's a spark of divinity. And it's that spark of divinity that's sealed with the insignia of the ultimate Kohen Gadol, of the Ribono Shel Olam himself. It's that spark of divinity that the Greeks and no one could ever render impure. Every single one of us has within us an innate presence, a spark of divinity. And that can never, never, ever be rendered impure or be removed from the world, says Rav Kook. Building on this theme that within every single one of us is an aspect of Kuhunah, an aspect of the priesthood. Rabbi Moshe Wolfson, in his beautiful Svarim, Emunat Itecha, Rabbi Wolfson says the following words. He says, B'Chanukah kol ish Yisrael kishemadlik et nerotav hu b'bechinat kohen shemadlik et ha-menorah b'beit HaMikdash. On Chanukah, when every single Jew, no matter where they are in the world, no matter who they are, when they light their candles on Chanukah, it's as if we are what? One of the Kohanim lighting the candles in the Beis HaMikdash. V'nirmaz b'tevat Chanukah. And this is alluded to in the word, the very name of the Yom Tov, says Rav Moshe Wolfson, okay? Because it's made of the letters Chet, and the same letters that make up the word Kohen. He says, for 8 days, okay, Hachet Yamim shall Kol Yisrael, Kol Acham Yisrael Naaseh Kohen. Because throughout the entire 8 days of Chanukah, every single member of the Jewish people becomes a proverbial Kohen. We're bringing light into the world in the same way that the Kohanim brought light into the world in the Beis HaMikdash. And that's really what this Yom Tov of Chanukah is all about. It's to remind us of what's chaser in the world. That's what's chaser in the world is there's no Beis HaMikdash. And the Beis HaMikdash was the central point where all the nations of the world were reminded of the splendor of God, of the light of God. And during these 8 days of Chanukah, we become the proverbial Kohanim. We restore a spark of that same light back to this world of darkness, says Rabbi Moshe Wolfson. I want to close with one last idea. We'll take a little bit more time to read this idea together. This is a teaching that comes from the Ohala Yaakov. The Ohala Yaakov was a great Hasidic master, an unsung hero, if you will, of the religious Zionist world. He was lovingly referred to as the Admor HaTzioni. He is the Rebbe of Hasiyatan, Rabbi Yaakov Friedman. He came on Aliyah in 1938, and he lives the last 19 years of his life in downtown Tel Aviv, okay, on number 18 Bialik Street in downtown Tel Aviv. If you go to 18 Bialik Street today, because my wife and I went last year, you can see basically the door frame of his old Beit Midrash still remains. But during those 19 years, the last 19 years of his life, he lives through some of the most challenging times in Jewish history. You have the years of the Shoah, which he narrowly escapes from Poland. It makes Aliyah just ahead of the Nazi onslaught. You have the fight, literally the battlefield, as well as diplomatically to establish the state of Israel during those years. And you have the early formative years and difficult years of the state of Israel. You know, the state of Israel today is a superpower. It's the fourth strongest military in the world. It's a leader in technology across the world. But in those days, people who made Aliyah, they were living in tent villages in many communities. And the Rebbe lives through this difficult experience. And what's fascinating is that in many of his teachings, he gives you a little bit of contextual awareness of what's happening on the ground in Eretz Yisrael during this time. And he always speaks very, very positively about the efforts to build up the Medina and to support the Medina. And I wanted to share a beautiful teaching from Chanukah of 1950 that the Rebbe shared in Tel Aviv in 1950. And it's actually a story. His son writes us about what happens when people came to visit the Rebbe. Okay, the Rebbe, in addition to his residence in Tel Aviv, he also, at the time Bnei Brak was first being built, he also maintained a residence in Bnei Brak. And I guess he went to Bnei Brak for some of the days of Chanukah. And so this is the teaching. Chasidim ma'achalim gmar chatimat tova b'Chanukah. He says, interestingly enough, the Hasidim wish one another a Gemar Chatima Tova on Chanukah. That's the greeting that we usually give one another on Yom Kippur, right? And some have the practice to use that greeting also on Hoshana Rabbah, because on Hoshana Rabbah we say that any decree that has not been finalized on Yom Kippur is finalized on Hoshana Rabbah. But the Hasidim believe that no, that Chanukah is actually the Gemara of the Chatimah, and they have the practice of wishing one another a Gemara Chatimah Tovah b'Chanukah. And he says, Yesh Davar Zeh Makor b'Sifrei Chasidim. We see this in a source for this in many of the works of the Chasidim. And he quotes specifically the Sefer Toldat Aaron, Rabbi Aaron Mizitimer, the Talmido Shel Arav Berditchev, Zecher Tzav Kol Shivracha. He says Rabbi Aaron Zitimer and also the students of Rabbi Levi Yitzchak Berditchev. Okay, they also write about this idea. Okay, and he says. Ad Chanukah hu Hoshana Rabbah. That until the days of Chanukah, it's as if what? We're still in Hoshana Rabbah. Meaning the Gemara Chasima Tova, the Gemara Tov, the Chatima Tova is still within our hands to influence. We have the capacity to wish one another Gemara Chatima Tova and to pray that we should be inscribed for a good year. Okay, the Chatima isn't finished yet. Okay, Chanukah is really the end of that Chatima. All right. Ukesha'anu, now listen to the Rebbe's words. Okay, this is Chanukah 1950. Ukesha'anu ma'achali ma'achshav gemar tov, hi b'chavana kfula. And when we wish each other a gemar tov now, meaning on this Chanukah 1950, just a year and a half after the establishment of the Medidah, we have a double kavana in mind, a double intent when we wish one another a Gemar Chatima Tova on this Chanukah. Not only are we wishing one another a Gemar Chatima Tova like we would on Yom Kippur and on Hoshana Rabbah, but in this Chanukah there's a dual intent. Okay, we don't only want to be inscribed now for ourselves for a good year, but what is the dual intent? Now listen to the parenthetic note. He says, the Rebbe's son says, Anashim Yerushalayim bikshu b'yamav achronim b'shifta b'bnei Brak l'chavadat al yisod ha'medina. That Jews came from Yerushalayim to seek his advice in terms of how we should understand as religious Jews the establishment of the state of Israel, and what should our attitude be towards the establishment of the state of Israel. Now, what did he answer these Jews that came to visit him? Hi atchalta de geula. It's the beginning of our redemption, the Rebbe said. And that's how we have to view the establishment of the state of Israel. Now, after the parenthetic note, he says, Im kein la'atchalta de geula kfar zachinu be'ezrat Hashem yiparach. If it's true that we've already merited to see the beginning of our redemption with the establishment of the state of Israel, okay? V'anu tzrichim, sorry, skip the line. Aval, hirak b'muvan hachomri. But that's only as it comes to a physical redemption. We see the beginning of the physical redemption of the Jewish people. V'anu tzrichim ligmar tov. And we want the completion of that sealing. We want to be sealed completely. That the spiritual redemption should come speedily and in our days. Biat HaMashiach. And that is the complete redemption, the coming of Mashiach. Ubebirkat Gemar Chatima Tova Gam B'Chavana Zu Yesh La Shaychut L'Chanukah. And wishing one another Gemar Chatima Tova with this intent, okay, not just in terms that we personally should be inscribed, but that we should see Mashiach. This has shaychus. This is connected directly to Chanukah as well, says the Rabbi. The ete b'ktavi me'et Rabbi Pinchas Mikoretz Zchutay Yagen Aleinu, as we read in the writings of the great Hasidic master Rabbi Pinchas Mikoretz, one of the prime disciples of Baal Shem Tov. B'chol Chanukah b'shat adlakat hanerot mitgaleh ha'or haganuz v'hu oro shel Mashiach. But every single Chanukah, and when we light our candles, it's a revelation of the hidden lights, the light of Mashiach. When we light our candles, we are bringing a little bit more of that light, a little bit more of that Mashiach energy into the world. We are contributing to changing the world of darkness, to experiencing at that moment the light of Mashiach. And please God, as we emerge from this unique Hanukkah, okay, in the midst of a milchama like none of us have seen in our lifetimes, may we be zocha to transform the spoils of this war, the darkness, to take the weapons that we're conquering and find a way to remove the weapons and the imagery of destruction, and just like the Chashmonaim, replace that imagery with the imagery of light. May we be zocha to experience the Gemar Chatima Tova and welcome Mashiach Tzidkenu. Gemar Chatima Tova, Chanukah Sameach to all.